Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named Utopia Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with the TV news reporting the assassination of the former Italian Prime Minister, which took place in 1978. Fast forward to 1979 in a certain part of Rome, where a young Jessica sits on a bench alongside her devoted father, Carvel. However, Carvel's expression is grave as he gets into a nearby car. It turns out that he has been discovered by Milner for attempting to expose Mr. Rabbit's identity and the various crimes of the network. Unexpectedly, the recipient of the letter is none other than the bespectacled man in the car who is working for the network and responsible for shifting the blame for the Prime Minister's death onto someone else. Sensing danger, Carvel hastily explains that he has completed the virus chemical, but with some modifications that no one else can use. Before he can clarify, a hitman killed the bespectacled man to silence him. Milner, undeterred by the chemical's changes, warns Carvel that he must deliver the chemical within a week, or she will put his daughter to the test. The scene flashes back to 5 years ago when Carvel had yet to meet Milner and had no daughter. His wife had just visited the doctor, bringing along their slow-witted son, Arby. The child was diagnosed with psychological trauma, prompting her to angrily question her husband about any wrongdoing towards their child. But Carvel feigned ignorance and never admitted anything. Later, he attended a confidential dinner attended by top scholars and notable politicians. Upon overhearing two scientists discuss a way to eradicate malaria by using a certain fungus to eliminate mosquitoes, Carvel scoffed at them, claiming that mosquitoes had existed for millions of years and their method would be futile. When the scientists asked how he proposed to eliminate malaria, Carvel retorted that he thought malaria was just fine. The others dismissed him, assuming he was simply intoxicated. However, this exchange caught the attention of Milner, who asked with genuine curiosity why eradicating malaria would be a bad thing. Carvel, becoming impatient, launched into a monologue about overpopulation and dwindling resources, sarcastically asking what she thought would happen then. To his surprise, Milner replied they would turn on each other to survive, leading to their own extinction. Carvel thought it was refreshing to finally speak with someone intelligent. After all, it was humanity itself that was the greatest disease. Milner pressed him for solutions to this foreseeable apocalypse, and the two engaged in a lively discussion until the dinner concluded. As he watched Milner leave with her drunken husband, he felt a twinge of jealousy. Back at Carvel's home, his wife felt disheartened as Arby remained unresponsive to the cute little rabbit. Carvel tried to reassure her, saying Arby would be fine in time. At the same time, he formally began his collaboration with Milner, introducing them to the concept and purpose of the virus chemical. When Milner and the secretary expressed concerns about the potential extinction of humanity, he explained that the antidote would preserve 1/20th of the reproductive population. Milner asked if that would be random, to which Carvel replied it could be random, of course. But if she had a choice, why not select? Milner responded she would not do that. Afterward, Carvel took Arby to his lab, clearly not for the first time. He slipped something into a jelly bean, and after Arby ate it, he killed a rabbit in front of him. The scene shifted to Carvel and his wife having dinner at Milner's house, where she openly expressed her love for her husband, who, of course, had no idea about her true endeavors. Just before leaving, Carvel accidentally caught a glimpse of the two being affectionate, which put him in a relaxed mood when he returned home. Later, his wife seriously asked him if he really hadn't harmed their child. Carvel assured her of course not. Seeing his sincere expression, she shared that she was pregnant again. Months passed, and Milner seemed dissatisfied with Carvel's affectionate demeanor. She warned him that there would be a gas leak the next day, and no one would need to come to work. Her intention was to eliminate the staff involved, and she cautioned Carvel that the virus chemical was far too important, and any compassion could jeopardize the project. The next day, Carvel's wife brought home another rabbit for Arby, and she was delighted to see him finally willing to interact with it. However, while she turned to cook, Arby gruesomely dismembered the rabbit. She was traumatized, desperately cleaning up as if she could wash away what had happened. Arby, oblivious, mindlessly ate the jelly beans while she stumbled upon Carvel's sketches of various experiments during her cleaning. At that moment, Carvel had taken a break and went to Milner's house, but only her unwell husband was home. The man understood that Milner had a profound affection for Carvel. She loved Carvel's intellect. Just as he expressed this, he vomited, and Milner returned, revealing that her husband was a drug addict waiting for her to bring back supplies. Carvel arrived home only to be arrested for suspected child abuse before he even stepped inside. Of course, Milner bailed him out, and he confessed to using Arby for his experiments, saying he wanted to try to control violence and needed subjects. He added he tried to make amends, but it was too late. Milner offered to help him deal with his wife to protect their careers, but Carvel countered, saying Milner's husband is the real threat. After returning home, Milner helped her unconscious husband bathe when the secretary informed her that someone had discovered the purpose of the chemical at the network's laboratory in Tel Aviv. He had already sealed the lab and arranged for those involved to take flight on a Universal Airlines flight to New York. Milner then ordered a plane crash to eliminate all the lab staff. Her husband, half conscious, demanded to know what she was talking about and who are you killing? But he would never know the answer, as Milner, for the sake of humanity, had made the painful decision to dispose of her beloved husband. Later, Carvel's wife tragically died during childbirth due to complications. Carvel was well aware that Milner was behind it all, and as he held his newborn daughter, Milner realized he was no longer the heroic figure she once saw him as. Returning home with his precious daughter, Carvel looked at Arby, who was eagerly waiting at the fence. Unable to face his own guilt, he decided to abandon Arby. Even as he watched Arby become a subject of the network, he poured all his love into his daughter, trying to escape the weight of his conscience. The story shifts back to 1979, the moment as shown at the beginning. After Milner issued a harsh ultimatum and left, Carvel, undeterred, sent out the meticulously organized information once again. Milner, just back from Rome, was shocked to hear the news but still forbade any action against Carvel. Meanwhile, the secretary was prepared to cover for Milner at a moment's notice. On March 22nd, they first dealt with a government official who had initially received the information and then tracked down Mrs. Thatcher's advisor since the documents had already been handed over to him. The advisor proposed a deal in exchange. If Milner's team could ensure that a certain Labour MP was absent from an important vote due to illness, they could orchestrate the downfall of then Prime Minister and elevate Thatcher to power. Naturally, the advisor had no interest in the network's affairs, and Milner easily agreed to his terms. Meanwhile, Carvel and his daughter returned to the hidden lab at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. Just as he hurriedly concealed the chemical, the henchman sent by Milner arrived. Politely, he informed Carvel that if he didn't cooperate, he would personally inflict torture on his daughter. Watching his innocent daughter grow increasingly anxious, Carvel began to sketch the information about the virus chemical into his manuscript. Fast forward to March 28th. The week had passed, and the henchman was ready to start torturing Carvel. The goal was to make him feel the pain his daughter would endure if he didn't cooperate. Carvel repeatedly insisted that the virus chemical was perfect, albeit altered by him, yet he didn't provide any specifics. Milner wasn't concerned, that didn't matter. She was confident they could find a way. As she watched Carvel suffer, she anxiously pressed him to tell her where it's hidden and if it was in these drawings. Carvel remained tight-lipped, instead expressing shame over his past actions and pleading with her not to harm his daughter. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the power plant. Milner went to investigate while the henchman sought out Carvel's daughter. Out of nowhere, a mysterious man appeared, freeing Carvel and installing an explosive device. He was the man who raised Jessica up later. Carvel hurriedly grabbed the chemical, dealt with the henchman, and injected the chemical into his sister, leading her away. Of course, everything was captured on surveillance. In a daze, Carvel seemed to see Arby again, and for what he hoped was the last time, abandoned him. Then, with the man's protection, he slipped into the panicked crowd and made his escape. At the time, the Prime Minister was ousted due to that pivotal vote, and the UK was set for a general election on May 3rd. However, just 2 days later, on March 30th, Thatcher's advisor was killed in an explosion orchestrated by Milner. The secretary was puzzled. If the plan was to eliminate her, why help take down the Prime Minister? Milner explained that they needed a strong government. After hearing this, the secretary reported that the virus chemical was still intact but hidden inside Carvel's daughter. Milner's eyes sparkled with renewed hope. Meanwhile, the man had sent Carvel, using the alias Mark Dane, to a psychiatric hospital and whimsically took a phrase from the little girl's drawings as her new name, Jessica. The man became her foster father and taught her how to use a gun. Young Jessica didn't yet understand that this marked the beginning of a life on the run. Since then, the ward welcomed a new patient named Mark Dane, a mad artist ready to take his own life. The scene shifts to a man undergoing multiple security checks before entering a cell with a stun baton. This was Jessica's new interrogator. Her previous one had been incapacitated by her screwdriver. Jessica laughed when she heard the guard mention this. Unfazed, the interrogator approached her, claiming he wouldn't hurt her and even inquiring about her injuries. Seeing this, Jessica grabbed his hand and asked if she could bring her a Bible. The scene shifted abruptly to a familiar figure in a house. He asked the little girl on the sofa if her mom was home. When she ignored his bullshit, he pulled out a toy from his bag. The girl rushed over, excited to see him. It turned out Arby had begun a new life here, living with the girl and her mother. At work, IT guy Ian attempted to pierce his tongue but found no nails. Just then, his boss passed by and asked if he was okay. He vented about his dull job and boring life. Concerned about Ian's recent unexplained disappearance and his self-harming behavior, he realized these were signs of suicidal tendencies. Ian quickly ended the awkward conversation while still searching for Becky's whereabouts. The interrogator visited Jessica again, revealing they had extracted the virus chemical from her and were now mass-producing a new version of the Russian vaccine. However, they were cautious about the modifications Carvel had made and were hesitant to deploy it. Knowing that the foster father was in the loop, they believed Jessica was aware too, which is why they were eager to get her to talk. If she didn't cooperate soon, they threatened to forcibly extract the information from her brain. Arby thought his partner John, the hitman in suit, was dead, but he found him waiting at the door. John had only sustained a broken arm and a lung injury. When Arby saw John with a green bag, he asked what was inside. John told him it's some clothes and food. Believing him, Arby invited his old partner in for a bite. John showed little interest in the healthy food on the plate. After some small talk, Arby realized not only was the network still intact, but John was still working for it. He was there to recruit Arby back into their operations. Just then, the girl and her mother returned, and John urged her to take out the air pump from the bag as a warning for Arby to comply and cut off all contact with them. On the other side, Minister Lawson was publicly announcing that they would assist Korvat Company in rebuilding and ramping up production of the Russian vaccine. Meanwhile, Michael had become Korvat's temporary acting CEO. After a rather awkward introduction, Minister Lawson congratulated him for becoming part of the team, but Michael didn't hide his disdain, stating that once the vaccine issue was sorted, he didn't want to see him again. He then stepped into the office and returned home, only to find that both his wife and Lily were clearly not there. The house was empty. Ian felt frustrated and confessed to his boss that during his disappearance, he had been pursued by a secret organization intent on sterilizing the global population, making him feel like life had lost its meaning. The boss thought he was just talking nonsense and quickly changed the subject. Just then, Ian received an alert that the hidden Grant was chatting under his real name online, so he hurried back home. Months had passed since Milner finished their operation, and they hadn't heard from anyone for a long time. Grant's case had been wrapped up, labeled as a suicide due to guilt. The hidden Grant couldn't return home or move freely, which was weighing heavily on him. When Ian saw him making a fuss about leaving, he tried to stop him, but ended up hitting Grant, making him even angrier. When Ian came to apologize, Grant snapped back, wishing that Becky had taken him away when he had the chance. While Wilson was waiting for someone, he noticed a spoon on the sofa and quickly stashed it away when he heard a noise. It turned out that Milner had taken notice of his awareness and brought him into the fold. She saw that he was worried about whether he was capable of the task and encouraged him, saying she wasn't born Mr. Rabbit and he could achieve more than he thought. At that moment, John successfully brought Arby in. Arby was unclear about who the woman in front of him was. He was just there to receive his orders. The task at hand was to eliminate the scientist Danny, who had obtained some crucial intelligence. While Milner rambled on about how if Arby had known his father, he would see he was an impressive man, Arby impatiently interrupted her, saying his father isn't anything special. With that, he turned and walked away. John bluntly remarked that Milner seemed a bit off, as if she had softened. However, she firmly believed Arby would come around, though she still asked John to send another person just in case. Becky was about to take her own life when Danny stopped her, offering a year's worth of medication in exchange for her help. It turned out that his college classmate had suddenly become an expert on Deal's syndrome overnight, and he suspected something was off. He asked Becky to investigate. The two of them went back to the classmate's house, and just as they were at an impasse, they heard a strange knocking sound. It turned out that an old madman was locked inside the house. The classmate had to confess that months ago, this man had suddenly appeared in his classroom and started solving equations on the blackboard. Realizing the content was related to Deal's syndrome, he brought the man home and published the findings under his own name. Danny was puzzled about how the madman knew all this, but Becky looked at the chaotic drawings covering the walls and began to form her own theory. However, since the madman spoke in a foreign language, she couldn't be sure of anything and didn't disclose her thoughts to them. Danny then decided to kidnap his classmate to extract information. In the cell, Jessica was staring at the clouds she had drawn on the wall, muttering to herself. Because she had injured someone, they wouldn't allow her back into the room where she could see the clouds. The investigator took the opportunity to point out that Carvel not only failed to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, but also stripped her of her rights as a mother. Jessica seemed affected and asked him why he didn't torture her instead. The investigator replied she shouldn't be treated like that. Meanwhile, Minister Lawson was calculating how to secure a tycoon couple's votes. Then, they were led into a room by Milner, while the man was sent off to the side. Wilson began playing a promotional video for them, saying all of humanity shares a breath and fate. Not a single one should be left behind. This was the new distribution plan for the Russian vaccine on Global Vaccination Day, which would ensure that the entire population was vaccinated on the same day. The Tycoon Ladies Foundation would cover the costs for countries that couldn't afford it. No one could pay such a large sum. The Tycoon Lady said she had over 23 billion. Her husband has 11 billion, and once he dies next week, he'll donate it all. Besides that, a few other billionaires will also contribute their wealth. It turned out they were raising over $200 billion to push forward Vaccination Day. All they needed was Minister Lawson to take the lead. However, Minister Lawson worried that it would ruin his political career. Milner replied that his only value was to obey. In her cell, Jessica was finally brought to the room where she could see the clouds. She admitted that her foster father had never told her what the modifications were. She had pretended to know just to survive, revealing the scars left by the previous interrogators. Turning around, she used her damp clothes to stun him and pulled out a rope to wrap around his neck. Turning to Ian, he stumbled upon surveillance footage of Becky and quickly called Grant to join him in finding her. Becky was currently with the scientist Danny, heading to their latest hideout. When Ian arrived, he heard some noise and went to check it out. While guarding the madman, Becky also heard something. Grant, noticing the sound, spotted Arby following them, but Arby caught him and simply gestured for him to be quiet, then dealt with the backup behind the door and told him to follow. Becky, seeing Ian, was not surprised but rather annoyed, questioning why he had come to find her. Just as they exchanged a few words rather than kisses, someone appeared with a gun, and before they could react, Arby took care of the situation. Danny's classmate was startled and suffering a heart attack. Danny dragged him away and was luckily rescued in the nick of time. The group fled a good distance away, only to learn from Arby that those men's targets were actually Danny, leaving him baffled about why that was the case. In the cell, the investigator was hanging from the door switch. As soon as the door opened, he might lose his life. The rope was made from the pages of a Bible. Jessica had been standing in silence for hours. Milner asked who had given the Bible to them. The security guard pointed to the investigator, and upon seeing this, Milner pressed the switch to send him off to meet Satan. She then turned to Jessica and asked what she had ever done to her. Afterward, the security guard routinely checked the investigator's belongings and casually picked up his pen. When he went to sign, he noticed the pen wasn't working well but didn't think much of it. No one noticed that the spring inside the pen had already made its way to Jessica. The scene shifts to John searching through Ian's company computer. Clearly, it wasn't working hours. Just then, the boss arrived and, noticing John's unfamiliar face, asked what he was doing. John replied it was just routine computer maintenance. However, the boss quickly realized something was amiss since they were an IT company and they didn't need outsiders for maintenance. In response, John produced a pre-prepared search warrant claiming they were conducting an investigation under the Anti-Terrorism Act, even handing him a phone to call and verify, but the boss insisted he just use their own phone. However, John took the opportunity to silence the boss and took his life for good. Meanwhile, Arby had spent the night hiding with Danny and Ian, happily preparing a healthy breakfast for everyone. The mad old man seemed to love trailing behind Grant. Arby stressed the need to understand why Danny was being hunted. Only then could they turn the tables and end everything. Danny felt he had been keeping a low profile lately, not causing any trouble. The only possibility was that a few days ago, inquiring about his classmate, he had met their mentor, a professor who was also a former member of the network. While they were talking, Grant discovered that the professor had just been killed in a hit-and-run that morning, meaning Danny's chase was indeed linked to that meeting. Danny recalled that the only unusual part of the meeting was when the professor randomly mentioned a project name. However, after searching, he found no such name and thought it was just drunken rambling. Now it was clear that this project had brought about his peril, so they needed to figure out what that name meant. Becky had another episode, experiencing hallucinations until Ian interrupted her, causing her to snap at him irritably. Ian then confessed that he had been looking for her all this time. Before Becky could respond, Arby asked where Jessica was. Becky said, ever since she took a manuscript to Milner, she haven't seen her again. Arby asked who's Milner. Ian explained she's with MI5 on their side. Arby replied, there's no sides, it's about whether you help or not. Ian couldn't agree and even cursed, believing that the network had already fallen apart. To him, this so-called chase was just Arby's word. However, a news report on the television showing Ian killing his boss forced him to accept that the network was still in action. Before their group moved, Danny had made an inappropriate move to flirt, prompting Becky to explain to Ian that she had met Danny when she first discovered her illness. Feeling dejected at that time, she had even slept with him once. But it was all ancient history. Ian was only somewhat surprised. On the other side, Minister Lawson was still trying to dodge the issue of Vaccination Day, as he still aspired to be the Prime Minister. The tycoon lady said they didn't need him to be Prime Minister. They just needed him to obey and announce Vaccination Day tonight. After saying this, the tycoon lady went back to see Milner, who was still distressed over Jessica, who remained motionless after being sent back to the cell, seemingly severely traumatized and unable to recover. Mixed in with her feelings for Carvel, Milner finally, after repeated urging from the tycoon lady, ordered the extraction of Jessica's brain tissue for the answers for the virus chemical. Jessica was transported from the cell to the operating room, completely unresponsive until the last moment before being injected with a tranquilizer. At that point, she stealthily slipped out of her handcuffs and took out the two scientists who were there to extract her brain. She escaped through a medical waste disposal tunnel and hid in a dumpster full of blood and flesh, managing to get away successfully. Wilson, reluctantly following Milner's orders, was tasked with finding Danny and the others with John. Along the way, he couldn't stop teasing John. John threatened to gouge his eyes out or kill his dad. Wilson, unable to express his anger, smiled stiffly. Meanwhile, Arby and his group were visiting a hacker, attempting to figure out the project name. He had already told Ian that if things went south and they figured out he had defected, he would take Grant away. Those violent scenes shouldn't be seen by kids. Fortunately, the hacker didn't suspect Arby's identity, but explained that they were looking for a U.S. biochemical weapons project from the 1960s. After cracking the specially encrypted project, the hacker concluded that it was a type of influenza virus developed by the organization in 1968. This organization, infamous for weaponizing the Ebola virus, was too afraid to test the power of this new virus. Upon hearing this, Ian suddenly realized that the project the professor mentioned referred to the code name for an atomic bomb, suggesting that once deployed, it would cause a nuclear-like impact. Nearby, the mad old man who had been switching channels beside Grant suddenly froze upon seeing something on one channel. Panicking, he spewed out a torrent of foreign language before grabbing Grant and saying that they were all going to die due to that biochemical. His crazed demeanor left a bewildered Grant thoroughly shaken. On her escape, Jessica took a moment to watch a young couple being affectionate in a park corner, stealing their bag, which contained clothes and a phone. The first thing she did with the phone was to look up Ian's picture, smiling like a schoolgirl as she did. Milner, on learning of Jessica's escape, nearly broke down. After all, it had taken 35 years to capture her, and now she feared Jessica might never be caught again. The tycoon lady suggested postponing the announcement of Vaccination Day given the circumstances, but Milner insisted on going ahead as planned. A panic of this scale regarding the Russian flu couldn't easily be replicated. At Korvat Company, Michael's new colleague discovered that the Russian flu test report seemed to be forged. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Michael forced a smile, claiming they must have misread it, while jotting down someone's watching on the paper, adding that they'd meet outside in 15 minutes. When he went outside, he warned the colleague that if they wanted to live, they shouldn't continue the investigation. However, the colleague had already secretly obtained a vaccine sample for testing. On the way, Wilson snatched John's gun, questioning whether he really killed his father. John calmly confirmed it and casually walked over to the trunk to retrieve a crowbar, knowing that Wilson wouldn't shoot. Instead, he broke Wilson's leg, stating that Milner only brought him in because she saw potential in him. With that, he left. Wilson, lying on the ground, yelled for John not to hurt them. After briefing everyone on the next meeting place, Arby returned to find the hacker, asking him to erase the old identities of 3 people and create new ones. The group realized that the biochemical project was likely the true Russian flu virus, but they had never reached the point of deploying it. Before they could process this information, Becky and Ian discovered drawings in the mad old man's notebook that were eerily similar to those in the Utopia novel, clearly inspired by their recent experiences rather than being copies. Becky, feeling anxious, hesitantly asked the madman if he was Carvel. Seeing his stunned reaction to the name made both of them even more nervous. Ian wanted to inform Milner, but Becky felt that since the network was still active, they shouldn't blindly trust Milner. It was best if no one else knew that Carvel was still alive, and he expressed regret about leaving on the train back then. Seeing the two of them getting close triggered Danny's jealousy, and he deliberately revealed to Ian that Becky had approached them initially to help him find his manuscript. Meanwhile, Michael and his colleague arrived at her small home laboratory where she had detected a special protein in the Russian flu vaccine. He quickly told her to stay put and not contact anyone, secretly betraying her as he watched the network members get rid of her. Meanwhile, Ian, realizing that even Becky was untrustworthy, reluctantly informed Milner that Carvel was still alive. Milner thought Ian was joking and, in her excitement, accidentally revealed that she knew Becky was with him. Sensing something was off, Ian abruptly hung up the phone. Minister Lawson unwillingly announced the vaccine day plan. John tracked down the hacker, but by then the entire family was gone, leaving only Arby waiting to negotiate, offering Danny in exchange for letting the girl and her mother go. When Michael returned to his empty house, he was startled by Jessica, who had stealthily entered. The scene shifts to an ordinary household where a plumber received a phone call and told his wife that someone's pipes had burst and needed urgent repair before heading out. However, he didn't actually go to fix any pipes. Instead, he drove deep into the woods, opened a hidden door, and retrieved a storage tank which he placed inside his car's headlight. He then headed to a small airport, parked the car, and discarded the keys. Returning home, he shot his wife and children before taking his own life. While Jessica was still asleep, Michael hesitated to report her and ultimately decided against it. He thought that if she discovered his intentions, he could end up in serious trouble. Exhausted, Jessica slept for 2 whole days before waking up. In an abandoned building, Grant took the opportunity to play with Arby's gun while he was away. After seeing the Utopia novel, Carvel picked up a sketchbook and started drawing. Ian suggested they investigate the news that had triggered Carvel's outburst, but since it was an overseas program, there were no online resources. He planned to sneak into the TV station to steal the footage and then ask Michael for help. Becky, believing Michael was working for the network, disagreed and sarcastically pointed out that Ian shouldn't have called Milner. During the argument, Ian flung out some hurtful words, mentioning something related to Danny without going into detail. Grant suddenly interrupted, realizing that the mad old man was Carvel. When asked about the news, he merely said it was a video of a cat sitting on a vacuum cleaner, nothing more. At Michael's home, Jessica was enjoying her meal while a restless Michael explained that he thought the chemical incident was behind them and that Minister Lawson was just paying him to help salvage the situation. Jessica reassured him not to worry. If she thought he was one of them, she would have killed him already. She then expressed her condolences for his wife and Lily's departure. Michael neither denied this nor explained their whereabouts. Danny, completely confused, was brought by Arby to meet the hitman John, unaware that he was being used as a pawn. Arby had already secretly sent the girl and her daughter abroad. He advised them to stay away from all electronic devices and live under new identities, as they would never see each other again. After stealing a last glance, he ended the call. John, who had agreed not to pursue the mother and daughter, was also given permission to kill Danny, stating that plans had changed and he needed to find Ian and the others. Arby didn't respond but asked where Jessica was. Meanwhile, Grant accidentally noticed a string of numbers on Carvel's wrist, thinking they were the network tattoos, but Becky recognized them as a concentration camp number. Based on the languages spoken by captured individuals at the time, she confirmed that he was speaking Romanian. Carvel, after hearing her words, took Grant's hand but held on tightly, unwilling to let go. After Ian sneaked into the TV station and stole the footage, he hurried to find Michael, only to run into Jessica. Excited and ready to confront Ian, Jessica immediately opened up to him, and Ian didn't refuse. Upon hearing that Carvel was still alive, Wilson thought it was time to confront him about the changes regarding the virus chemical before pushing the vaccine. Milner stated that at this point, what mattered was that the vaccine could be injected into Jessica. She then took Wilson to a shopping mall, emphasizing the timeline for the depletion of essential human resources. However, Wilson insisted that their mission left them with no choice and hoped he wouldn't be soft-hearted like Carvel, risking everything. After that, he signaled to a seemingly inconspicuous mall employee who approached to explain his mission. He was one of 3 candidates trained for special operations, and upon receiving the order, he would end his life immediately. With 9 days to go until vaccine day, he would retrieve a storage tank containing the Russian flu virus from a parking lot and sequentially release the virus at 5 small airports around the world. Meanwhile, Ian, after his encounter with Jessica, felt increasingly troubled. He didn't reveal that Carvel was alive, but Jessica told him that although Michael hadn't confessed, she knew he was being forced to cooperate with the network. What's more, when she went to submit her manuscript, she discovered the virus chemical inside her but didn't mention Milner's identity, simply stating she shouldn't have gone in the first place. She secretly slipped a phone into Ian's coat and calmly let him escape. Michael made a phone call and was blindfolded and taken somewhere. It turned out that his wife and Lily were being held captive, which was the real reason he agreed to help Minister Lawson. Wilson stared at the spoon, feeling his resolve wavering. Milner candidly stated that when this final plan was implemented, even if the vaccine took effect quickly, tens of thousands could die. She asked Wilson if he could handle that. Wilson, initially shocked and hesitant, became resolute and replied he could. Becky and the others found a passerby who could translate for Carvel, asking about his origins. He revealed that he was a Romani from Romania. As a minority, his people had also suffered hellish hardships, similar to the Jews. His parents and brother died in a concentration camp. He had found a way to sabotage the crematorium, preventing bodies from being incinerated, which led to them being discarded in the forest. He hid among the corpses for 2 days before escaping. He was 5 years old at the time. Since then, he had dedicated himself to preventing such tragedies from happening again. Later, he met the remarkable woman known as Mr. Rabbit. That's when Ian and the others learned that Mr. Rabbit was actually a woman. Carvel stated they had created something to solve the world's problems. Becky asked if he was referring to the virus chemical and if it would really work to reduce the population. Carvel replied yes, but said he made a choice. Ian asked if he meant he had chosen a specific race. Carvel seemed reluctant to confront this and began to lose coherence, not answering. When he saw the news footage Ian brought back, he panicked and started speaking in foreign languages, mentioning 5 families. It turned out the trigger for his outburst was a news ticker, reporting that a man in the US had suddenly killed his entire family and then committed suicide. Becky connected this to a similar recent case in the UK. Elsewhere, Wilson was taken by Milner to meet Ian's brother who had been kidnapped. She planned to kill him and use the news of his brother's death to lure Ian, deliberately assigning this task to Wilson. She candidly mentioned that in a few days, she would choose the final candidate from 3 people, including the mall employee. At this crucial moment before establishing their utopia, she needed a trustworthy partner. After that, she handed over the decision of whether to shoot to Wilson. Ian and the others confirmed that 5 families had inexplicably perished on the same day, and Becky explained that she was helping Danny to exchange for medicine. Perhaps burdened with guilt for having slept with Jessica, Ian lost his temper when he saw Grant wearing his jacket at an inopportune moment, abruptly lashing out and driving him away. When Ian went to apologize, Grant had already pulled out Arby's gun, retaliating with the rage of being wrongfully accused of murder. He was about to storm off when, fortunately, Arby returned and stopped him. After Michael got home, Jessica revealed that Ian had been there. Unable to bear the weight alone anymore, she also told him that Milner was Mr. Rabbit. Michael confessed that his wife and Lily had been taken hostage. Jessica reassured him not to worry, they would rescue them. Just then, someone knocked on the door and Jessica quickly hid. It turned out to be Milner, who had come looking for Ian. Michael feigned calmness, insisting he hadn't seen Ian at all. However, Milner spotted a Bible nearby and asked if he believed in God. Michael replied that he didn't. Realizing the situation, Milner tried to terminate him, but Jessica countered and aimed her gun at her. Remarkably, Milner managed to disarm her by saying that her father was still alive and proposed to find him together. Grant asked Arby how it felt to kill someone. Arby agreed to teach him how to use a gun, but refused to teach him how to kill. However, he accidentally mentioned discovering the true identity of the mad old man. Arby asked who it was. Becky found that the locations of the 5 incidents were not only near small airports with agricultural spray planes, but also close to busy major airports, inferring that this was a method for spreading the virus. Carvel suddenly became alert, confirming this inference and stating that for them, human lives were inconsequential. He pointed at the newly updated map with a code, saying this was the evidence. Just then, Arby lost his sanity, having just learned that the mad old man was Carvel, his tortuous father. He silently killed the translator and then chased after Ian and the others with his gun. Fortunately, Grant intervened in time, but both he and Carvel were taken away by Arby. Meanwhile, Wilson made his final decision, taking out Ian's brother and the 2 agents. The scene shifts to an ordinary fast food restaurant where the burger guy was on shift, getting yelled at by impatient customers, but unable to retort. Shortly after, he returned to his shabby little apartment, gathering information about the 5 families that had mysteriously perished, and quickly packed his bags, ready to head out. Meanwhile, Jessica had taken a photo of Milner being held hostage, planning to send it to the tycoon lady to warn the network to stay away from Carvel and Ian. However, news of Ian's brother's murder at Ian's hands had already broken. Without wasting time, Jessica grabbed Milner and set off to find them, momentarily putting aside her intention to rescue Lily and Michael's wife. She instructed Michael to smuggle in a phone to locate where they were being held. Michael protested that they would search him, to which Jessica told him to just stick the phone up his rear. In an abandoned building, Ian impulsively considered rescuing Grant. Becky pointed out that it was impossible to find him, urging Ian to calm down before making plans. Just then, they learned of Ian's brother's death, but aside from comforting the grieving Ian, she felt helpless. Upon receiving the photo, the tycoon lady discussed strategies with Wilson, who was trusted by Milner, but they couldn't determine where the picture was taken, only that the word ice appeared in the painting on the table. Now was a crucial time for spreading the virus chemical. All commands needed to come from Mr. Rabbit. Without her, the network would essentially collapse. However, no one in the group knew that Milner was Mr. Rabbit. Commands were issued through various encryption methods. Aware of how things operated, the tycoon lady and Wilson proposed that they continue issuing commands as Mr. Rabbit without alarming anyone. On the other side, Arby had calmed down but was now without a plan after unexpectedly reconnecting with his father. He recalled a mountaintop from his training days that seemed perfect for a father-son trip, so he decided to take them there first. On the way, he wanted to get closer to Carvel, but it was as if he couldn't see him. He just followed Grant. Back in the abandoned building, Ian hid the translator's body. Becky struggled to process everything and quickly took medication, but she still experienced hallucinations, seeing the translator speaking to her. When she came to, she told Ian that since Danny was missing and her meds were running out, she hoped that when she chose to end her life, he wouldn't stop her. Ian didn't respond and suggested they find Michael first. Meanwhile, Minister Lawson was fuming over his ruined career and decided to forge a threatening letter demanding $20 million in cash, pretending it was sent anonymously. Wilson and the tycoon lady knew exactly what was going on but didn't call out his foolish scheme. After agreeing to pay him off, they sent him on his way. Wilson also realized that the letters in the photo actually spelled out Lily's name, though not completely. At Michael's home, he had just hidden the phone and was about to leave when Ian confronted him with a knife. He quickly explained that he was being forced to cooperate for the sake of his wife and daughter. Becky restrained the unhinged Ian and proposed they find a way to hand over Carvel's new plan to the network, hoping that if they recognized the virus chemical as a form of genocide, they could halt the operation and avoid deploying the deadly Russian flu virus. Aside from revealing that Milner was Mr. Rabbit, Michael also mentioned that Jessica had gone after Ian's jacket. It was only then that he realized the jacket was with Grant. Before Becky could ask further, police lights began flashing outside. They hadn't managed to escape, and leading the team was none other than Wilson. As they made their way up the mountain, Grant acted foolishly, cursing at passers-by, which infuriated Arby, who slammed him against the wall. But Grant, feeling he had nowhere to turn, remained defiant. While they argued, Carvel suddenly called out to Arby, but he was actually addressing Grant, mistaking him for his son, which explained his tendency to follow him around. Meanwhile, Wilson dismissed the importance of the new password chart, stressing that the main goal of their trip was to find Milner. Ian chimed in, asking if he meant Mr. Rabbit. Wilson quickly sent John outside to prevent any exposure of Mr. Rabbit's identity. Since Ian mentioned he was carrying the sorrow of losing his brother and wanted to deliver the chart to stop everything, Wilson finally took notice and sent the chart to the tycoon lady for verification. At the mountaintop, Arby instructed Grant to pretend he was talking to Carvel, hoping to find out why Carvel had abandoned him. Carvel replied, because he was terrifying. Just then, a noise caught Arby's attention. He turned to see Milner in the distance, only to have Jessica press a gun to his head from behind. Jessica asked if their father was over there. After Arby was brought over, Jessica told Grant to keep an eye on him and rushed to confront her father about what he had done to her. Carvel, however, didn't grasp her questions and immediately recognized her as his daughter. As he reached out to her, Jessica told him not to touch her. Angry, she raised her knife, but her father's declaration of his love instantly softened her. Nearby, Milner told Arby that in Carvel's eyes, there's only Jessica, not him or her. After the tycoon lady confirmed the password chart, she rushed to Michael's house, stating that things were dire and they needed to find Milner immediately to stop everything. Ian and Wilson then followed the phone's location to find her, while Michael took the opportunity to meet with his wife, instructing her to hide the phone and wait for the action signal. Once Michael and Becky confirmed the two women's locations, he messaged Lily to pretend she was unwell and enter the restroom. He planned to rescue them through the window, but Lily, afraid of heights, couldn't manage it. So Michael and his wife charged back to subdue the guards, brandishing a gun to demand the door code. The guard showed no fear and was ultimately sent to meet Satan by the wife, allowing the family to escape safely. Meanwhile, they asked Carvel what change he had made to the virus chemical, but Carvel said he did this all for his daughter, Jessica. Milner called out to Carvel, who instantly recognized her. Seizing the opportunity, she claimed to be the one he knew best and requested a private conversation to uncover the truth. This brief moment became a rare bonding time for the siblings. They vented about how disobedient Grant was, and Jessica thought Arby had lost weight, although she didn't like his beard. Carvel admitted he chose to let the Romani continue to thrive. Milner wasn't angry. She simply replied, since he's a god, of course he could make his own choices. However, she quickly added that there was still something to do, though she didn't specify what. Carvel approached the unsuspecting Grant, taking the gun and walking towards the siblings. Just as Arby handed Jessica the passport he had prepared for her, a fake identity created by the hacker, it was his way of expressing love, though he struggled to articulate it. To their shock, Carvel shot Arby and continued firing, shouting for Jessica to run. Perhaps he saw Arby as a threat to his daughter. Once the bullets were spent, he happily released Milner. Jessica, meanwhile, helped Arby escape to a side, removing the bullets with her bare hands, desperately trying to save him. At that moment, Wilson arrived, and Milner learned that the changes in the chemical weren't what she had assumed, only the Romani could reproduce. It turns out Carvel had discovered that the virus chemical could render the vaccine ineffective, prompting him to modify it to ensure it worked for the Romani. This was all to protect his beloved daughter. This meant that other ethnicities, even if vaccinated, would still die if they contracted the Russian flu. Previously, Milner's group had used Jessica's test, which is why they hadn't noticed the vaccine's effects. Wilson urged her to immediately stop the deployment of the Russian flu virus. Milner dialed the phone and announced that the operation was starting. If that happened, it wouldn't just kill tens of thousands, it could lead to the deaths of over 100 million people. Wilson was furious, but only Milner knew who the final executor was. He had no choice but to turn his gun on Carvel to threaten her into retracting the order. Surprisingly, Carvel calmly told Milner not to feel pressured. Just then, a gunshot rang out and Milner fell. It was Grant who fired the shot. He had intended to finish off Wilson next, but Ian stopped him. Carvel, devastated by the loss of his beloved, was overcome with grief, while Grant finally realized the weight of his actions. The final executor, who had just received that call, was none other than the burger guy, who had been getting scolded earlier. After hanging up, his expression shifted dramatically. He tossed his hat to a bewildered customer and, without a word, set off to complete his mission with determination. The scene shifts to the train station waiting area where the burger guy ran into a mother and her child. One moment, he was laughing along with the mother's concerns about environmental issues. The next, he abruptly told the mother that she shouldn't have had her child, and she might as well get rid of her child now. The remark terrified them, but he casually went on his way to catch his train. Meanwhile, Michael had brought Grant back home, hoping to help him return to a normal life in a supportive environment. However, Grant remained rebellious, refusing to study and even grabbing a knife before heading upstairs. Michael was completely at a loss as to how to handle him. In a hospital, Arby was brought back by Wilson and his team for treatment, but he remained in a coma, possibly never to wake up. They still hadn't determined who the final executor was, and with 90 days until the virus release date, they knew this person would take care of any potential loose ends. If they sensed they were being monitored, they would immediately switch to releasing the virus. So, they couldn't launch a full-scale manhunt and instead sought out the only known identity among the three, the mall employee. However, when they found him at work, it confirmed that he wasn't the one they were looking for. Wilson planned to kill the mall employee to eliminate any future threat. Becky and Ian quickly talked him down, deciding instead to sneak into the mall employee's home for clues. To avoid detection, they pretended to be burglars. They discovered a hidden phone that revealed call logs from the previous day, including a number linked to the professor, who had supposedly died a week ago after sharing a crucial piece of information with Danny about the biochemical weapon project. In the hospital, Carvel was still grieving Milner's loss. Jessica urged him to stay awake, learn to communicate, and stop avoiding reality, helping him clean the blood off himself. John, fearing that Arby would come after him once he woke up, sneaked into the hospital room to finish him off. However, Jessica spotted him just in time, and he had to leave empty-handed. At the police station, Wilson and Becky met with the professor who had just been arrested for murder. It turned out that he had faked his own death to escape the hitmen because the final executors were all trained by him. He knew that before the virus was spread, those in the know would be eliminated. He revealed the identities of the other two and repeatedly expressed how dangerous his situation was, requesting Wilson's protection. Wilson believed he was overreacting, reminding him that they were in a police station guarded by a dozen SWAT officers, surely the safest place. Back in the hospital room, Jessica was shaving Arby's beard when Wilson asked Carvel how he could shoot someone he loved. The madman, likely unaware that he had injured his son Arby, thought the question was more philosophical and replied softly that, compared to all things, human love was insignificant and would eventually turn to dust. During this time, the burger guy realized someone was on his trail, so he came to retrieve the specific location of the virus canisters in advance. After the bathing guy and the fish seller revealed their locations, they were both silenced immediately. In the hospital, the tycoon lady brought the latest updates. The mall employee and a third person had been found and dealt with, confirming that the final executor was the burger guy. Based on the news of the bathing guy and the fish seller's deaths, as well as their visits to 4 of the 5 families that had been wiped out, they managed to piece together the burger guy's method of collecting the canisters and found that he was already preparing to release the virus. However, it seemed he hadn't obtained the last location in the UK yet, and they needed to figure out who might have that information. Minister Lawson planned to escape abroad. He knew that as long as the network remained intact, running away would be pointless. So, he organized all the evidence he could provide, hoping that Michael would step up to make it public. He promised him $5 million if it worked out. Naturally, Michael refused and ended up beating him up, accusing him of dragging him into this mess. At Michael's home, Grant was still causing trouble, preventing Lily from studying. Michael's wife didn't yell or scold. Instead, she sternly called him over and told him not to scare Lily and make the house tense. Grant reluctantly agreed. It seemed his rebelliousness was a reaction to authority, but when faced with an equal dialogue treating him as an independent individual, he quickly backed down. Becky discovered that the bathing guy and the fish seller were both students of the professor and speculated that the final location might be in his hands. However, they were too late. The burger guy had already infiltrated the professor's home, obtained the address, and filled his jail cell with fuel through the police station's ventilation system, effectively burning him alive. They confirmed the parking lot's location based on the area where the UK incident occurred, combined with the professor's spending records. Since the hospital was closest to that location, Ian called Jessica to join him. At the parking lot, the burger guy had secured the virus canister, but as he prepared to leave, Jessica shot at him. After a tense chase, just when he thought he had escaped Jessica, Ian confronted him with a knife. Despite his severe injuries, the burger guy was still determined to release the virus. Ian kept insisting that the vaccine wouldn't work and would kill many people. But the burger guy was unmoved, and Ian was left with no choice but to pull the trigger. The crisis was over, and everyone returned to the hospital, but Wilson's expression showed no sign of relief. After a night passed, Becky experienced another episode, seeing some wet hallucinations. Ian noticed and rushed to comfort her using his muscles, but with only 2 days' worth of medication left, she didn't want to suffer anymore. She prepared powerful sleeping pills, hoping to leave with dignity today, and wanted Ian to be with her during her final moments. This time, Ian agreed. When Michael returned home, he found Grant not only doing chores but also politely greeting him, which surprised him. Then he happily announced that they could start anew abroad. Wilson had arranged new identities for them, and he happily took the family to retrieve their documents. However, Wilson didn't genuinely intend to let them go. Instead, he threatened them by putting the family's lives at risk, forcing Michael to continue executing the plan to release the influenza virus. It turned out Wilson had devised a strategy even better than the original plan, deploying the virus in isolated corners or islands that had minimal contact with the outside world. This way, only a small number of people would need to be sacrificed, yet it would still create enough panic to drive everyone to get vaccinated. This would allow both sides of the operation to continue while sterilizing the majority without sacrificing billions of lives. Michael tried to persuade him otherwise, but Wilson said he was not the person he used to be. He instructed Michael to follow the plan and then sat alone, pulling out a spoon. In a certain room, Minister Lawson received the ransom as promised, but the money had been poisoned long ago. One moment he was laughing happily, and the next he was dead, staged to look like a suicide with a smile still on his face. In the hospital, Jessica noticed the closeness between the two. While Ian was out, she said goodbye to Becky and warned her the pain of watching someone she loved die was incredibly hard to bear. On the other side, Wilson summoned John and tossed him a spoon, which John brushed off casually. However, Wilson shot him in the head. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Carvel, responding to Ian's earlier request, checked the medication Becky had been taking. He discovered it wasn't some experimental drug for Deal's syndrome, but rather a complex sedative that could lead to addiction and hallucinations if taken in excess. The shaking was a withdrawal reaction triggered by the medication. In short, while Becky carried the gene, she hadn't actually fallen ill. She had been set up by Danny from the start, likely to control her for his own purposes. Ian hurried to share the good news with Becky, only to find she had already taken the pills to end her own life. As he desperately tried to save her, Wilson was busy marking himself with the symbol of Mr. Rabbit. Suddenly, 2 men appeared and took Carvel away. Becky, just waking up in confusion, didn't have time to feel happy, and neither did the unsuspecting Jessica, as they were also taken. Meanwhile, Arby on the hospital bed woke up alone, and Wilson painfully completed his transformation. The new Mr. Rabbit, who had already killed his former self, moved toward the 5 virus canisters that had just been retrieved, quietly waiting to be released. Thus, the story of Utopia came to an end.